I like when people say that I am pretty good at this thing and they get something out of me doing it.
Ultimately, there needs to be some form of gratification.
Or it's like how you respond is the important part, because that's not really it. Sometimes these things are going to happen. Our job is to just kind of figure out what the next best step forward is.
The term rolling with the punches is really real, not only sport, but in life in general.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, I was joined by a good friend of mine, Jason Anderson. He is an ex-professional snowboarder, now turned ultra-distance cycling athlete. And we talked about how he got into snowboarding, what a professional snowboarder's career looks like, how he got into ultra-distance cycling, and what he hopes to accomplish in the space. If you guys are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the show. Thank you for taking part in this immersive listening experience. A meaningful existence is a moving target that, no matter how close, will always be out of reach. We hope this message finds you with an outstretched hand. As we attempt to uncover complex truths, remember, life's toughest questions can be answered if we all just focus on one thing: being good people.
I will say right off the bat, number one, welcome to the show. Number two, your framing is perfect. It's going to look great on our Instagram clips.
Dude, first off, thanks for having me. Secondly, I'm a man of aesthetic. What can I say?
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Appreciate you appreciating.
All right, man. How you doing?
Good, man. Yeah, just trying to take in a nice hot day here in Richmond. I've been outside most of the day, so feels good to sit down. I've been on my feet working, so it's good to take a little breather here and come join you.
Cool. The question is, how many cups of coffee have you had today?
First cup at 6:30, made myself AeroPress. Then I stopped for an espresso at a cart at like 8 a.m. and then an iced coffee at like 10:30. So 3. Wanted to go 4, but stopped. Couldn't do it.
Okay. For those people who are listening who aren't coffee drinkers, could you take us through what exactly those things mean? What's an AeroPress? What's a cart?
For sure. Yeah, a little off-putting. AeroPress is this neat little contraption. They're like $30, $20. And essentially they're a suction-based system where you can put your ground coffee beans in, add your water, kind of create this vacuum seal and let it just steep essentially before pushing it down through this filter into your cup. It just makes a really good different style where you can really taste the flavors. I like pour over, but I typically lean towards the AeroPress because I love a good espresso coffee, and they make heavier ratios if you do it that way. And then the cart, it's called Pay, P-A-I-X, and it's some friends of mine here in Richmond that started an espresso-based pop-up cart, and they'll jump from like corner to corner throughout the week, let you know where they are on Instagram ahead of time, and you can just head over there. It's a little mobile coffee shop, and they have the best espresso in the city. So I pretty much stop every Wednesday.
Cool. Dude, this is so fascinating to me. The one thing that the running community doesn't have, that the cycling community does, and you are like heavy into this, is like this coffee culture where you guys ride your bikes with your little gear, and your gear heads, and you get coffee together. I think it's the coolest thing ever. Talk a little bit about that.
For sure. Yeah. I think since cycling is so rooted in European culture, Italy and France, there was always this big kind of rollover from that culture and how tightly knit those two things are within Italian lifestyle and French lifestyle. So when it came this direction towards the US, now you have this culture of individuals who want to just kind of casually ride their bike, enjoy a ride, and stop by coffee shops. And it very much is a part of the culture across the board. And I think part of the reason running doesn't have that is because it doesn't quite settle in the stomach as well when you're running as it might when you're on smooth paved roads on a road bike. So very, very popular thing to be on a long ride and take a cafe stop, get a little bite to eat, a croissant, something along those lines, as well as a nice cup of coffee. Typically smaller cups. People usually go for espressos or cortados because they're quick to drink and it's not a lot of volume on the stomach. But yeah, it is hand in hand.
And for those listening who don't follow Jason on Instagram, you need to, because I mean, his Instagram story, you're going to get to live this world without actually being there. He's a man of many talents, and one of them is posting photos of coffee and pastry on his Instagram story.
What did yeah? What can I say? I've got an affinity for pastries and coffee, and I love to vicariously bring the people along at each time I go.
Cool. You have a very interesting life. I am lucky that I am friends with you. I know a lot about this myself. I'm sure I'm going to learn a whole bunch of stuff too, but I want to talk to you about sort of your journey from professional snowboarder to this new passion of riding your bike through the mountains and on roads for many days at a time, and sort of what the thread that took you from point A to point B was exactly, and what the similarities are there. So let's start with, like, take me back to young Jason who fell in love with snowboarding. When did that happen for you?
Yeah, so I guess the origin of the story really starts with skateboarding, which came along in my life at 8 years old. I had a buddy introduce me to it, and I got stoked on skateboarding. And then a family friend was in town for a vacation in the winter, sometime around Christmas when I was about 12. And they were visiting, and Massanutten was really close to my house. Massanutten is a local ski resort in the Virginia Harrisonburg area, for those of you that aren't familiar. And they were going there to go snowboarding and take a snowboarding lesson, and had asked my parents if I wanted to join. Um, I think naturally I said yes because I always thought it looked pretty cool. So we went out there, and oh man, I'll never forget it because it's quite comical how it started, because I was terrible. I mean, most people are when they start, but we were taking this lesson, and my friend had gone just ahead of me because the instructor was kind of calling us down one by one to slide down a little bit and make a heel side stop. And then everybody just kind of stops, and it kind of layers. So he goes down, makes his stop, kind of just sits down because everybody at that point, your balance is a little wonky. So he just like sat down, and it was my turn next. I come down a little too hot, went to heel side stop, got a little too close, freaked out, completely slipped out heel side and hit him in the back of the neck with the toe edge of my snowboard. So that was the first thing I remember about snowboarding, and it will always be ingrained in my mind. But we continued that day and went through the lessons, and things got better. And by the end of the lesson, you have the option to stay longer if you want and use the rest of your lift pass for the day. So we did. And then I think I just asked my parents if I could take a couple more lessons. So they got me like a 4 or 6 lesson pass that first year. I was like 12, 13. My birthday's in February, so it's typically right in the middle of the season. And I went back and just kept getting more stoked every time. I would stay every time and run the pass all the way out. And the next year, I just asked for a snowboard for Christmas and asked if I could keep doing it. And I fell in love. And I can remember too, joining the freestyle team and just seeing what people were doing on television, X Games, things like that. Fuel TV was really big at that age for me, so I was always watching that on TV. And so I started riding the train park, and the first contest I ever entered, I placed first. And I think for me, in my heart, that was the first time I ever felt like I was good at anything. I always felt pretty average outside of that. So those feelings, that elation of winning something, of being above average at something, like really took root and grabbed hold. And from there I was hooked. It was a done deal. I always told people I went to high school with that I'd do it professionally. And it was kind of a joke because it's like, oh, Virginia doesn't have snow. It doesn't have mountains, but riding the ice, man, riding the bad terrain makes you better at riding the good stuff. So that passion compiled, and I just took it seriously, I guess. I just loved it more than anything. And where your energy is and your time is obviously going to be the best portion of you. So I just kind of followed it and kept up with it and would go every single day. And sometimes miss a little school here and there. But I was committed. So took it on and shortly after high school moved and just continued to pursue it until I made it my everyday job.
Cool. Something you said there that was interesting to me, and I've thought about this a lot, not so much recently, but do you feel like when you did it the first time, you were instantly like hooked on it? Or was it this, it sounded like the way you worded it, it was this slow thing that sort of built up, because that's been my experience with the things that I like to do. I don't know. You just hear in interviews, people who are prodigies of things are like, I did it the first time and I knew I was going to spend the rest of my life doing this. And I've never felt that before. It's jujitsu is like that for me, where like, I would say the first 6 months, I have no idea why I kept showing up. I have no idea. I was just like, I'm going to keep doing it. And at the 6 month mark or so, I was like, oh, I actually really like doing this. And it was just because I kept going.
Yeah, for sure. I would totally agree. I would say that it was a compounding thing. Like I said, I was pretty terrible the first time, and I definitely wasn't like, "Oh, this is it." It took me a while. It took me, I would say, once I finally got to the point where I was at a contest and I had won, I was like, that is the moment that I can truly say I feel like I was 100% in. Prior to that, I enjoyed it, but I don't know if I would say I was set that was going to be what I was going to do. But I think that, yeah, that's a common theme for me too, is like, for instance, running. Dude, I I used to hate it. I used to hate running. And the same, I didn't used to hate cycling, but I never thought I'd ride a bike on a road. I used to think those dudes were goobers, dude. Like the guys in glorified underwear and helmets riding down the side of the road. Like I never thought that would be me, but here we are. I love it. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting how that all kind of, that paradigm shift happens later on.
Do you think that like the being reaffirmed on things is important to that? Because I think that the things that I like to do, people have told me that I'm good at them. For example, I don't think that I'm good at doing this podcast, but people tell me that I'm very good at doing this for like this being my first couple episodes or whatever. And people, this is probably the best example of it, that I'm good at communicating. And so I'm just like, okay, whatever, I'll keep doing it. Like, that sounds cool. I like when people say that I am pretty good at this thing and they get something out of me doing it. Is that, it sounds like that was a part of it, of like you won and it was like reaffirming you like, okay, you're pretty good, you should continue.
For sure. Yeah. And well, firstly, you are great at this podcast. I love it. I think every episode so far has been excellent. But yeah, I think ultimately there needs to be some form of gratification. It is a human desire to find gratitude and that gratification for whatever we are doing. And a lot of things will have a finish line, or they will have a first place, they will have a trophy, they will have a prize. And I think those are great factors that aid to this. But if it's something like coaching or talking or having a podcast, there's no finish line. You're probably not getting handed a podcast trophy, at least not right off the bat. So having someone come to you and say, hey, man, like you're really good at this, you should keep doing it, 100%. It absolutely plays into, I think, the balance of risk and reward, or perceived effort and received gain. I think there's definitely some form of gratification that needs to come in order for us to continue wanting to do something. Because if you're not getting any gratification at all, whether it's self-based or coming from someone else, then I don't want to say it's pointless, but I think it kind of starts to eventually fizzle.
Yeah. When did you are like, okay, I'm a professional snowboarder now?
As soon as I started getting a paycheck.
When was that?
Shoot, that would have been 2015, 16.
Okay. And from my understanding, from you, you did that from 2015, 16 to 2020. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's literally to the pandemic. I was in Switzerland, and they shut the borders, or they were about to. I literally got on a flight pretty much the night prior to them saying we're not receiving anyone back into the United States. Um, and then from there, it was kind of a 2 month waiting game of like still being on my contract and getting some money, but not being able to snowboard. And then eventually, once the world realized like, oh, this might take a while, at that point, it was just a not immediate cutoff, but a rapidly declining phase of my life.
Gotcha. How crazy would that have been if you couldn't have come back to the US?
I had a buddy. He was over there. He stayed in like Switzerland, Austria area for a handful of months before returning. Uh, Part of
He's
me kind
different
of
now.
wishes I would have experienced that for just like the wow factor. But at the same time, it felt pretty good to be home when everything was so like chaotic and no one knew what was happening.
Yeah. Let's talk about that 5 years of your life, man. Like what was the first trip that you went on, and like kind of like give me a rundown of, this is something that I don't quite understand. What do professional snowboarders do? Like what is your day-to-day, week-to-week look like?
Yeah. So my life was a little different than some professional snowboarders because you can take the route of competitive snowboarding in the sense that your goal is like the Olympics or X Games or Dew Tour or any of these high level slope style events, or half pipe events or border cross events. And then you have someone like myself who I was out almost as kind of a moving billboard. My sole goal was to just film and put out really cool tricks on, whether it be like a urban handrail, like at a school, at a college, on a campus that had a lot of snow, or a big jump in a backcountry setting. So for me, my travels were based around the filming that we were doing for the brands that I was riding for. And most of those clips at the time were being pushed and promoted on Instagram. So um, for me, it was a lot of traveling to these locations that we knew had good snow and we knew had good features. And if we weren't riding the things outside of the resort, then we would be at the resort trying to achieve a similar concept. Um, because no matter what the type of snowboarding is that you do, there's this connectivity with the brand and the identity that they're creating as well. So for the brands I was riding for, they were primarily like park snowboarding related, freestyle snowboarding related, rather than backcountry technical outerwear pieces or anything like that. So you would usually find us out filming street clips or at the resort filming park stuff, getting photos done. A lot of follow cams with GoPros. So essentially, yeah, you wake up, have breakfast, go out, and we would snowboard from like 9 a.m. to like 4 p.m. and try to just like bang it straight through. And it would be long days, and then you would just come back and kind of that phase of my life was a lot of partying.
Yeah.
So you come back and party, and it would kind of just recycle day to day. But yeah, essentially, your Instagram ad.
Yeah. And I think like, I don't know, you saying that made me think like, if you don't go to college or you go to whatever, you figure out a way to do that some way. Like what, that time of your life of like 20 to 30, whether you go to college and then it doesn't matter, you figure out a way to like to party hard.
Yeah.
What was the first trip that you went on? Like the big one?
Dude, ironically, well, I had some in the States early on going to the West Coast before I was technically getting a paycheck, with brands prior to that. But the first one, ironically, the first and last trip were both to a place called Laax in Switzerland, Laax, and they have like the best terrain park in the world. So ironically, it started there and ended there.
That's kind of poetic.
But yeah, it was, yeah, in a very Edgar Allan Poe dark kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah. If you take out the thing that the world was experiencing at the time,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you go through that, right? Is there any sort of like notable, like what was your favorite trip?
Dude. And I will forever say this. The first trip to Japan that I ever went on, man, like everything about Japan is so cool and so unique, from the culture to the people to the snowboarding to the food. Like it was mind blowing. Like I'd always dreamt of what it might be like to step that far outside of my comfort zone of growing up in small town Virginia. But like, dude, what a cool experience. I flew in on my birthday, and this would have been like 2017, I believe. And I was in Tokyo for the first like 36 hours alone, and just like being there, not knowing what's going on. Like, dude, it was rad. It was a really cool, eye opening experience. At first, definitely a little scary, but then we would return to Japan year after year, and I was always so excited to go, man. Like, so much love for that place.
Cool. That's something that I would love. Like I'm not very well traveled, like I mean, I've been to Jamaica on a vacation, but I mean, the farthest west I've been from Virginia and the East Coast or in the United States is Chicago. Like I've never gone farther west than that. And experiencing things like that or something that when I asked you that question, you were like, dude, and you couldn't put into words what this journey and trip meant to you. I don't know what that feels like. I mean, I know what that feels like when I think about Jamaica in a certain extent, but just like going, you have a unique perspective because you got to immerse yourself in that culture.
Mm. Dude, yeah. And anytime anybody asks me where they should take a trip, I have like two like go-to answers, and they both carry that same sentiment, and it is certainly Japan and Iceland. Like both of those places, for two very different reasons, are uh, cool. Like you said, it's kind of a loss for words thing until you experience it. It's kind of hard to explain. But man, just like breaking outside of your usual box and seeing something that's so far fetched that it's almost hard to perceive before you get there. It's really healthy, and I think I'm excited for you to eventually just like go on one of those trips because I know it's coming soon.
What is it about? I know it's like you get to experience something so unique. Is that what it is? It's like because it's so different, you're forced to almost take everything in. It like gives you presence. I don't know. Like,
Yeah, I think it demands a sense of like hyper awareness because you're just so skewed from what's going on. For one, if you do go straight there from like the US, your time clock is like completely flipped around. It's like the heaviest jet lag you could ever have. And then if you're not fluent in Japanese or Japanese culture, then everything you're experiencing is so different from what you're used to. And then if you're in a place like Tokyo, the city is so fast paced and so bustling, and there's so many lights and colors. It's just like this overwhelming sense of like, it's just like sensory overload. And you just have to be like, whoa. And you feel like everything's moving really fast, but since it's so new to you, it seems like you're in slow motion and everybody around you is like moving really quickly. So it's definitely a system shock to experience something like that for the first
cool.
time.
Yeah, I'll do it eventually. I'll figure it out eventually.
Just let me know, dude. I'm ready to go back.
Yeah.
They're open again. Let's go.
Yeah, we'll do it. When you're flying back from Switzerland, COVID happened, or we're this impending doom of what's going to happen. You don't really know the totality of it yet. I'm sure you're probably not thinking about riding your bike when you're on the airplane back home. What got you to cycling?
Yeah, definitely not at that point. Still hadn't really ridden a bike outside of like a BMX bike or a mountain bike. So road bikes to me were definitely not even a thought at that point. So yeah, flew back, took a job in Seattle not too long after that, and moved out there for like a really brief stint. I actually bought like a ironically, vintage Japanese single speed bike when I lived there to try and like ride my bike to the skate park and like eliminate some of the use of my car. Um, and then that ended, and I was in kind of a pretty dark spot. I think now looking back, the growth and reformation that came from the pandemic for me was huge, and it was an aid into who I am now. But at that time, I did not know that, and I felt like I had been stripped of my identity because I was no longer snowboarding, and I didn't have that, and I didn't know who I was because I had tied myself so tightly to snowboarding that once that was removed, I felt like I lost most of who I was. So I was in a really dark spot, dealing with some anxieties and some mental issues and some physical issues at that time. Came back home and really started to dive back into my faith, my spirituality, and what it looked like to be in tune with myself. That eventually developed into kind of a love for fitness and going to the gym, which rolled over and translated eventually into wanting to do a triathlon. Very quickly discovered that I still hate swimming, still am so bad at it. Was running a little, but couldn't get hyped on it because I didn't understand pacing at that time. But got a road bike because I was like, well, that's the last thing I got to have. Because at the beginning I was trying to train for this triathlon, still riding that single speed that I brought back from Seattle. And like, let me tell you, that's not conducive to like good road bike speed. Like I'd try and ride with people and just like get immediately dropped because you're trying to keep up on this rickety old 75 single speed. And like, so long story short, bought a road bike off Facebook Marketplace. And like, man, there was something about the way that it felt to begin learning something again that really sucked me back into the feelings that I had for snowboarding. There was this form of movement that was like fast paced and self powered. And I genuinely felt the same nostalgic feelings that I had as a kid, like learning to snowboard. There was just enough difficulty that it was challenging and just enough friction to make it hard. But at the same time, it felt like, oh, hey, if I like keep doing this, this could open some pretty cool doors. So I continued to ride and I would go out. And I think another part of it that really sucked me in was I was getting to experience these back roads and these scenes and these views that I hadn't seen from a car, or if I had, I wasn't really aware of the things that were around me. So it opened this new door of appreciation for the place that I lived. And yeah, man, all these feelings just started like compounding into this like sphere of gratitude for what cycling really was. It wasn't just these dudes on the side of the road, just like once again in spandex trying to like take up the lane or whatever. There was like way more to it than that I had previously been like super close-minded to. So yeah, dude, just got hooked on the feelings. And from there forward, it's been quite a bit of a story.
Yeah. So there's hope for me to be a cyclist because I think the same thing when I see you guys with your jerseys and all your gear reflective on the side of the road.
We like we like to look like dorks. I think it's fun. It's part of the game.
Yeah. I wonder if it had to be something like cycling for you because like snowboarding, I've never snowboarded at all, which is crazy. And Cayman, who's sitting here next to the camera, was a snowboard instructor, and you're one of my best friends. So I don't know how I've never been snowboarding. I've got to go. I'll probably go this year, but yep. I imagine it's like, especially in your case, dude, you've seen some of like the craziest places to go on planet Earth, which are the sides of snowy mountains. And it's not like you say, right? We're cycling, you're not in your car, so you get to appreciate it newly. Like, dude, when you're snowboarding, you're on the side of a mountain and it's you sitting on the mountain or riding down the mountain. So I wonder almost if like that just piqued my interest of you're getting to see this really crazy landscape from a perspective that not a lot of people get to see. And it's almost probably the same sort of feeling as I would imagine you had when you were on top of a mountain.
Dude, 100%. And the cool thing about cycling as well in that aspect that's slightly different from snowboarding is the accessibility is a lot higher. I mean, once you have the bike, the amount of roads that there are to ride are pretty endless. And once you have a gravel bike, a road bike, and a mountain bike, it continues to expand and unlock this whole new opportunity and way to find, for lack of a better term, roads less traveled. The perspective and the things you get to see are just very similar to that sense of snowboarding down the side of a mountain where there is motion, but it still allows you to take in everything around you.
Yeah. I talked to a kinesiology professor a couple episodes ago, and he's like a strength guru. And one of his final comments was very simply to not overlook the psychological benefits of exercise. And he was definitely talking from like a perspective of people need to start exercising because it's good for their health. But I think what you're saying and what I'm thinking is a very elegant way to put that into words that make a little bit more sense of like, it's not just that working out or exercising enhances our mood and makes us better people. It does those things, but there's this very creative, artistic side of it that I think gets glossed over, maybe even laughed at a little bit. And I even laugh sometimes hearing myself say that, but there is a beautiful thing that happens with movement, whether you're just working out or cycling is another one that, and I'm a nerd about the human body moving in general. So like this isn't, forgive me for geeking out for a second, but cycling's an easy one because it's this cyclical nature of over and over again. And you can kind of get lost in the beauty and rhythm of it. Snowboarding, in my head, I imagine just like carving down the side of this mountain. It's very similar. There's like this ebb and flow to it. Is that something that you think a lot about, experience? One of the reasons why you like the two of those things?
100%, man. And it's funny you pick up on that as not a snowboarder, because one of my favorite things, man, and I can remember like in Switzerland are the places where you can go find these hills, mountains that have open slates, man, fresh snow, would be like hiking to the top and riding your line down and just trying to be so smooth. And once you look back up, you can see the line you quite literally carved out. And it's this really beautiful picture of the way things occurred, but then you can just go do it again. And it's like this never ending, almost cyclical thing. It's a thing of repetition. And I think for someone like myself, I find a lot of meditation in cyclical motion. The repetition allows for my brain to find a flow and find a state that I'm super happy with. I'm inherently bad at sitting down. Like, I'll be completely honest. Like, by the time we get off this podcast call, I'll probably need to go run or like do something outside. Joke with my partner Kat that I have to get my zoomies out because I just get so restless. So like for someone like me, like, yeah, the cyclical nature, the repetition of whether it be hiking up the mountain, carving a line down. Okay, let me hike back up and see if I can make a figure eight with those lines now. Or like going outside and pedaling and finding, if it's on my mountain bike, like you can do a similar thing. On the road bike, it's more of a fun thing to like go find a hill with good turns and like go ride the descent. With running, I think I enjoy the sound. Like I rarely run with music or anything because I love the sound of like a good cadence. So like for a person like myself, that is the creative part of my brain, linking those two things together and allowing me to find a sense of presence that I cannot find sitting still.
Yeah. It sounds silly too, but I think this is a good conversation to people who feel like, oh, exercise like is a very meathead jock thing to do. Like, this is a good conversation to have to bridge that of like, no, just understand, like I nerd out about this thing. It's rhythm, it's timing, it's tempo, it's breath. All of these things are at this. I mean, when I started exercising, it was totally like, I got to get in better shape. I want to look better, but I don't care about that stuff at all anymore. It's that peace of mind that regularly participating in that rhythmic thing gives me is the reason why I still exercise. That's what jujitsu is. Jujitsu is so cool, especially if you're going with somebody and sometimes it just clicks. Like that's why athletes do what they do with their specific thing, is because 95% of the time it doesn't happen, but the 5%, maybe even less than that, that you get into that rhythm where everything just goes. That's why we all do the fitness and the things that we do.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, I mean, I don't know a whole lot about jujitsu, but I'm assuming there's a similarity here where, and we can tie this back into the conversation of gratification, but you're finding that like gratification through eventually achieving that flow state that originally was not there when you were first learning. So when you were first learning, for instance, for me with running and I didn't know how to pace, I didn't enjoy it because I was always putting out what I thought was more perceived effort than what I was getting in return. So once I eventually found that if I slow my steps down, control my breathing, lock in, I can go further. And then I'm like, oh, wait, like I'm getting the hang of this. This is exciting. And that's that gratification that like you might not receive from an individual until you get better at it, but you start to feel it ahead of time. And I think those are the initial like dangling carrots that are like, here, like this is just hard enough to keep you engaged, but also there's enough of a reward for you to continue coming back. And I think until someone finds that in their fitness journey, there's no way that they can want to continue. So
Yeah, I think that's a good indicator for like finding the thing that you're actually passionate about is the gratification you get from doing it and nobody else knows that you did it is enough to keep you going.
for sure.
I think about this a lot where I don't know if I could run 100 miles if I was the only one or maybe like two other people knew about it. I don't know if I could. Like that is a really hard thing to do, is to get yourself to do a super challenging thing with, I mean, you literally get no gratification, none, other than at the end of the day, you know, you did it yourself. And that idea is very intriguing to me. I want to at some point in my life do something, maybe not running, but really hard that me or maybe like one or two other people know about, and that's it. And I don't come on a podcast and talk about it, and I don't even call my mom and tell her that I did this cool thing, but that just I know that I did it, because that is a cool, being in a place where you can be that satisfied with an effort like that is cool, because it's really, really difficult to get satisfaction out of like just solely your own effort.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, man, that's that would be a huge life goal to have, because it certainly would be so difficult to do something so hard that you're even proud about it and not want to go boastfully speak to others about it. That's next level self gratification. I think we could all learn a little bit from that for sure. I love that.
What is like biking? So I would even also like to say too, you don't just like biking, you want to bike crazy distances through many days. Is that correct?
I do. Yeah. Yeah.
What's the one that you have coming up? What is it? How long is it?
So the big one this year is called Badlands in Spain. It's about 500 miles with roughly 60,000 feet of climbing or 55,000 feet of climbing. It's a lot of vert. It's almost a double Everest. And they have a 5-day run. It's like September 3rd to the 8th. We'll just go out there and see. I would love to do it in about 72 hours.
Cool. What is ultra biking? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, ultra distance cycling,
Okay.
self-supported cycling, any of those terms.
Is there something that you've been able to pin down that's different that it gives you that snowboarding did not?
Yes, in the sense that I think um, it is certainly more challenging on a mental aspect in a different way. Um, there are some ties there, and I never really thought about this until this past year when someone brought up the correlation of snowboarding and endurance sports, because the way I snowboarded was essentially a roundabout introduction to endurance sports, because you would go out and hike the same feature for however many hours it took for you to film 1, 2, 3, 4 tricks on that. And sometimes that would be all day. You would literally just hike up and ride down and hike up and ride down, hike up and ride down. And it's like, so essentially there was an endurance aspect, especially the mental portion, because you have to be committed, borderline stubborn a lot of the times to like get what you wanted done. But I think there's more of a connection with like self clarity that comes with the biking. Since it isn't as technical as, say, doing a 1080 on a very large jump on a snowboard, which is much more, it's arguably way faster paced, and you have to be way more attentive to exactly what is happening in that moment, as to where like on these long gravel rides, I can lock into like everything that is happening around me and what is happening in my head, and like just kind of get down in the bars and like focus on just literally what's 100 yards ahead. Like, so it's not like I'm really projecting like, okay, if it's a mountain bike, it's a little different because there is more technicality and swerving and finding a line choice. But if it's road biking or like smooth gravel riding, it's much more meditative and really makes you dig to a point, especially in those late hours if you're riding through the night and sleep deprived, much the same way a 100-mile race goes. You get to a point where you feel like you've hit that wall and you just need to keep pushing, which with snowboarding, if I got to that point where I was hitting a wall, I was either just choosing a different trick or I was going inside at the end of the day. Yeah. And with this, it's like you either turn around and arguably travel a very far distance home from the way you came, or you continue going the direction you were headed and get to the end of the route eventually. So there is a mental piece to the puzzle that does somewhat correlate, but also has its own very unique differences.
I think there's something really rewarding about doing things that have high stakes, in the sense of like, obviously you could hurt yourself if you're doing these crazy snowboarding tricks, which I know you have. But I want to say too, we are talking about real stakes, and I'll let you tell the story about your previous attempt, because like you were borderline in actual trouble, health trouble, and that can happen, but we don't ever go into these things, me with the ultra running background, thinking that things are going to go wrong. And, you know, at the very least, we're like, we know everything will be okay at the end of the day, for the most part. Right. But the idea of like, if I leave from this aid station, I'm going to get to the point where whether I turn around or whether I keep going to the next one, it won't matter. Like, I still have to do a really hard thing to get to safety or what have you. So I think there's something about having higher stakes that makes things more rewarding. The gratification, it makes that higher.
Yeah, well, it becomes more real for sure. And like snowboarding has that to an extent, but like bar backcountry riding where avalanches are the real risk, like if you're in a controlled setting of like a terrain park, or like you're filming in the streets in a city, like it's very easy to just walk away. Ultra distance sports aren't the same. Like you said, at one point or another, you're either doing a very hard thing northwest or southeast. Like there is no way around it at that point. So yeah, it definitely becomes very real very fast.
Yeah. Take me through your recent 250 miles. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That was
yeah, Rockstar 250.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, that one, this was a race that I had signed up for in preparation for Badlands. And I would say arguably this is the first real ultra distance test I had. Certainly the first self-supported test I had. which means it's just me supporting myself out there. So signed up for the race. It's about half, almost to the T, half of what Badlands is. It's 250 miles and just over 25,000 feet, 28,000 feet of climb. And it's from Harrisonburg to Roanoke. But instead of straight shotting, they have a paved route called the Pave route, which does pretty much straight shot to a rough estimate. This one kind of like cuts way out into like George Washington National Forest and makes all these squiggles down to Roanoke, in which you circumnavigate at the end. And it's pretty crazy. And it is all gravel, although at some points it's mostly hike a bike up some of the climbs near the beginning and some other little segments here and there because of how chunky the terrain is. But man, set out on this ride, was like feeling really prepared. Like fitness levels are feeling great. Pretty much thought I had everything I needed. Knew there was some rain in the forecast, but if you choose a sport like this, like inevitably you're getting weather. So you just you can't be fair weather in an ultra distance sport. Like you just got to take it as it comes. So leave the start line. It's pretty gray. This is like 7 a.m. leaving Harrisonburg from Black Sheep Coffee, which is the official start line. And I get to the top of the first climb, like 30 miles in. It's the top of Reddish Knob. And you're at like 4,000 feet. And it starts to open up and rain. So I like quickly throw on my rain jacket, go zip it. Zipper's broken. So I'm like, okay, well, I don't have time to fiddle with this. I just like clamp it shut with my hydration pack, but there's still like a gap down the center. And the next thing you have from there is like 26 miles from the top of that to this country store, which is the first like available stop on the route where you can buy food and things like that. So I start going down this descent, man, and it's like 12 miles of descent. So the speeds are picking up. It's raining harder. I'm soaked through at this point. I like don't have anything guarding my core. So my core temperature is dropping. So I'm like pedaling as hard as I can once I get in the flats in order to like bring my heart rate up. So I'm like burning a match to get to this country store. And I'm like, man, just like counting down the miles, like watching them come up on the screen. Cause at this point I'm like starting to get really cold and really wet. And I just want to like get out of the rain. So I like get to the store finally, like am still just like freezing at this point. Like no matter how hard I pedaled, I just like could not get warm. So I like get into the store and I'm like shivering, like to the point where it's really visible. And people are like looking at me like I'm a little crazy. So I'm like going to the bathroom. I like know I have a spare pair of socks and some like dry clothes in my frame bag. So I like go in there and I like try to like change, and like my hands are so useless at this point that like it takes me like 15 minutes to like change and like put on my dry layer. And I go back out there and I like grab a cup of coffee and I'm like shaking and like it's spilling out of the sides. And the lady that's like cooking the food at this grill is like, honey, she's like, I do this job on the weekends. I'm a paramedic full time, and like you're going hypothermic. Like I think you need to come stand next to the grill. And so I'm just in the store. I'm like, yeah, like whatever I can do to get warm. So like stand back there, drink some hot coffee, eat some hot food. And I know there's still rain in the forecast. And I just used my only layer that I had for nighttime riding. So I've pretty much pigeonholed myself at this point. And so at this point, I'm only 56 miles into a 250 mile ride. I've burned a match. I'm feeling absolutely depleted. Was debating whether I continue or not, almost threw in the towel. Sat there for like an hour and a half. This was supposed to be like 10 minutes, get what I need in and out, keep going in order to stay on my time goal. After like a bunch of debate, eventually left and decided to continue, knowing that I would have pretty limited options once I left there, because the next town is at mile 140 and there's only one stop in between those two, which is a spigot for water at a church at mile 107, which fortunately for me was there, because in the chaos of not knowing what to do, not knowing whether I should continue, I forgot to refill my bottles. Mistake number 2. And so dude, like pedal, like I guess I'm doing this thing. Like, I'm committed now. Just keep going forward and get to that water at that church and think about it. And I'm like, man, it's going to be dark by the time I get to Covington at mile 140. It's supposed to drop into the high 30s. I'm a little damp again now from sweating and that second little bit of drizzle. I'm like, I can't ride through the night. Like, my original plan was like go all night, like um, just push through and get it done in 24 hours or less. So at this point, I had to reframe what I was going to do and decide to just like take the night, get a room, undress, let everything dry, and continue the next day, which was really challenging because it was far off goal. But I did that. I slept. I let everything dry at Covington at mile 140 because I got there at like 9 p.m. Got on the bike again the next day at like 6:30 and finished the second day. And I was still really proud of the effort overall because it taught me that although it wasn't the goal I set out to do, I was capable of reframing goals in the middle of an uncontrollable failure, essentially. Um, and it just taught me kind of a new maxim for toughness in the sense that, like, even if you miss your first goal, rather than like pulling all your cards and throwing in the towel right then, there's always a valid second option. And yeah, I still got in 30 hours, which wasn't a great time, but I know there's always a chance to get faster considering that was my first time at it. And it also taught me that my 72-hour goal for Badlands, which is double Rockstar, is very achievable because if I did that and was way off pace for my original goal, then I would still have came in at like 60 some hours for that distance and double. So a lot of good takeaways, but definitely became really real in the sense of like, hey, you could die out here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a scary thought, man. Like, I've told you this when you were actually paced me for the majority of the back half of my 100-mile attempt. And there was literally times in that section where I was like, I hope that I pass out right now and I fall over and I severely hurt myself so that I can stop doing this because I will not quit, but I want something to pull me out of this thing. Like, and that, looking back, I'm like, that is a crazy thought to have. And I mean, that's sometimes where you go, man. And similarly, like when you're in like legit danger, it's almost, it's hard to push out or be okay with or get through the, oh man, like this, I'm in real trouble right now. Like, why would I do this to myself? Thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, like, say that I had gotten hypothermic on the second gap from the store to Covington, where instead of being 26 miles away when I started to get cold, I could have been 70, 80 miles away. Like, it becomes like, wow, like that might have came right at the nick of time. Like, it could have gotten worse. This could have been at night. This could have, like, there's a lot of learning experiences and takeaways, but they also make it very real. And I know that the human body is often a lot stronger than the mind, and you do find those limiting factors sometimes, but I still think there needs to be a regard for self. And like for me in that setting, like, okay, I'm going to stop tonight because my life isn't worth my first race. Like I want to keep doing these. So like I should probably not ride into the night with wet clothes at 30 degrees. Right. So like it's understanding where you're headed and the steps that it takes to get there without jeopardizing yourself too far.
Yeah. And something you said there of like from a athlete perspective of like, I was able to reframe my goals and I finished the race and I had a lot of good takeaways. It's like, I know who you are as a guy and you are not somebody who doesn't prepare for things. And a faulty zipper on your jacket leading to all that stuff happening. It's like, that's so out of your control that for the people who aren't trying to run or ride 500 miles, things like that happen all the time. And it's my philosophy on this and life in general is a lot of times things just happen to you. And I don't even want to say in like a corny way of like, it's not, or it's like how you respond is the important part, because that's not really it. It's just like roll with it. You know, okay, this is coming at me. All right, what's next? And it's not about you finishing the race or doing the thing that you want to. It's just accepting the fact that sometimes these things are going to happen. And our job is to just kind of figure out what the next best step forward is. And it's silly to think that you know what's going to happen to you when you do your Badlands attempt. Just like it's silly for me to pretend like I know where I'm going to be in my life in 5 years from now, things like that.
Dude, absolutely. Yeah, I think the term rolling with the punches is really real in not only sport but in life in general. Because had I thrown in the towel, I mean, I thought about it for a while. Like, okay, it's mile 56. Like, uh, I had some family that lives like right up the road from this country store. Like, I quite literally could have pedaled like less than a mile and been at somebody's house that I knew in the warmth, dry clothes, place to sleep. Um, but I knew I wouldn't be happy. Like, I kept telling myself, like, maybe this isn't the year. Maybe you need to come back next year and try again. Maybe you pull the trigger here and just say, hey, it's not worth it. And all these thoughts, these negative like feedback thoughts would pop up. But ultimately, I knew I'd be a lot more bummed if I pulled out then when I didn't feel like I'd fully tested my limit, rather than like, okay, say I do start pedaling again and it starts raining again, and then I have to like call or like hit my Garmin InReach like SOS button. Because then it's like, okay, I got pulled for like 100 miler if you like fell over and broke a leg. Like at that point, like that's out of your control. You got pulled for a good reason. If I pulled myself in the comfort of a country store because I like wasn't sure, I would never have been happy with that. So getting to the finish line, despite my goal time being 6 hours ahead of me getting there, I was still stoked because I kept pushing even when I knew it could be hard.
Yeah. What do you hope to accomplish with this ultra distance cycling? I know like we just talked about how silly it would be to pretend like we know what we're going to get out of this sort of thing, but
Yeah.
is there something in mind?
I think there's always a search for self that comes into play. Especially, I think every endurance ultra distance athlete can say that they're not always fully certain why they do this. There is always a search for your limit, for personal betterment. But I think for me, in all genuine honesty, um, there's an opportunity here and a chance here to tell a story. And for the things that I learn in the difficulties of cycling to be applied in the difficulties of life beyond the bike, that not only help me, but help other people. So I think there is this ultimate search for, okay, what can I learn and how can I apply it to be a better servant for those that are around me?
Cool. Beyond the Bike is a good name for a podcast.
I love that.
You should start one.
Yeah, maybe I will. I'll have to call an expert on podcasts, but I think I know one. So,
well, I can help you out a little bit. Heyman can mostly help you out a little bit, but last question, dude. What's a good person? What do you think a good person is?
oh man, a good person is someone who's constantly pushing themselves aside to invest in their community or the cultures around them, despite whether they feel like they fully align with them or not. I think there's always something to be said about a person that wants to help, and help without expecting any kind of receiving in return. So I think at the end of the day, if you can put a smile on and go greet those people, whether your thought processes or your hearts align, and just enjoy that time together, that'll make you a better person, a good person, whatever you want to call it.
Cool. If people want to check out what you're doing, races, things like that, where can they find more from you?
Instagram. It was Go Fast Turn Left for a long time. Now it's J Anderson Rides. J Anderson Rides for short.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, Jason's Instagram was Go Fast Turn Left. We haven't talked about this actually. I'm so bummed that you changed it from that, dude. You should get a Go Fast Turn Left tattoo.
Maybe I will. Maybe I'll just bring the handle back. I keep getting that.
Dude, yeah. I see your little, like your profile picture, and then it's not go fast, turn left. And I'm like, what are we doing, man?
I don't know. I think I pulled the trigger a little early. Speaking of which, I shouldn't have done it.
No, it's okay. I mean, I like what you're doing now, especially if you feel like it works for you. But anyways, it's just a nostalgic thing for me. And I feel like go fast, turn left it works for the bike too.
It does. Yeah. Pedal fast, turn left.
Thank you for doing this, man. Love you, bro.
Thank you. Love you. Can't wait to see you again.
If you guys are watching on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Also, if you enjoyed, please share the episode with someone you love, perhaps your grandma. We'll see you next time.